Hello friends, it's Cassandra with Vine. When we left Black Beauty, he and the other horses were talking about how humans sometimes do things because they're fashionable. They might look nice, but they're not the best decision for themselves or their animals. Today we're going to turn back to Birtwick Park and find where they're going to go next. Chapter 11. Plain Speaking. The longer I lived at Birtwick, the more proud and happy I felt at having such a place. Our master and mistress were respected and beloved by all who knew them. They were good and kind to everybody and everything. Not only men and women, but horses and donkeys, dogs and cats, cattle and birds. There was no oppressed or ill-used creature that had not a friend in them, and their servants took the same tone. If any of the village children were known to treat any creature cruelly, they soon heard about it from the hall. The squire and Farmer Gray had worked together, as they said, for more than 20 years, to get bearing reins on the cart horses done away with, and in our parts you seldom saw them. But sometimes, if mistress met a heavily laden horse with its head strained up, she would stop the carriage and get out, and reason with the driver in her sweet, serious voice, and try to show him how foolish and cruel it was. I don't think any man could withstand our mistress. I wish all ladies were like her. Our master, too, used to come down very heavy sometimes. I remember he was riding me towards home one morning when we saw a powerful man driving towards us in a light pony chaise with a beautiful little bay pony, with slender legs and a hybrid, sensitive head and face. Just as he came to the park gates, the little thing turned towards them. The man, without word or warning, wrenched the creature's head round with such force and suddenness that he nearly threw it on its haunches. Recovering itself, it was going on when he began to lash furiously. The pony plunged forward, but the strong, heavy hand held the pretty creature back with force almost enough to break its jaw, while the whip still cut into him. It was a dreadful sight to me, for I knew what fearful pain it gave that delicate little mouth. But master gave me word, and we were up with him in a second. "Sawyer," he cried in a stern voice, "is that pony made of flesh and blood?" "Flesh and blood and temper," he said. "He's too fond of his own will, and that won't suit me." He spoke as if he was in a strong passion. He was a builder who had often been to the park on business. "And do you think," said master sternly, "that treatment like this will make him fond of your will?" "He had no business to make that turn. His road was straight on," said the man roughly. "You have often driven that pony up to my place," said the master. "It only shows the creature's memory and intelligence. How did he know you were not going there again? But that has little to do with it. I must say, Mr. Sawyer, that more unmanly, brutal treatment of that little pony it was never my painful lot to witness. And by giving way to such passion, you injure your own character as much, nay, more, than you injure your horse. And remember, we shall all have to be judged according to our own works, whether they be towards man or towards beast." Master rode me home slowly, and I could tell by his voice how the thing had grieved him. He was just as free to speak to gentlemen of his own rank as to those below him. For another day, when we were out, we met a Captain Langley, a friend of our master's. He was driving a splendid pair of greys in a kind of break. After a little conversation, the captain said, "What do you think of my new team, Mr. Gordon? You know, you are a judge of horses in these parts, and I should like your opinion." The master backed me a little so as to get a good view of them. "They are an uncommonly handsome pair," he said. "And if they are as good as they look, I am sure you need not wish for anything better. But you still hold that pet scheme of yours for worrying your horses and lessening their power." "What do you mean?" said the other. "The bearing reins? Oh, I know that's a hobby of yours. Well, the fact is, I like to see my horses hold their heads up." "So do I," said master, "as well as any man, but I don't like to see them held up. That takes all the shine out of it. Now, you are a military man, Langley, and no doubt like to see your regiment look well on parade. Heads up and all that. But you would not take much credit for your drill if all your men had their heads tied to a backboard. It might not be much harm on a parade, except to worry and fatigue them. But how would it be in a bayonet charge against the enemy, when they want the free use of every muscle and all their strength thrown forward? I would not give much for their chance of victory. It is just the same with horses. You fret and worry their tempers and decrease their power. You will not let them throw their weight against the work, and so they have to do too much with their joints and muscles, and of course it wears up on them faster. You may depend upon it, horses were intended to have their heads free as men's are. And if we would act a little more according to common sense, and a good deal less according to fashion, we should find many other things work easier. Besides, you know as well as I that if a horse makes a false step, he has much less chance of recovering himself if his head and neck are fastened back. And now, said the master, laughing, I have given my hobby a good trot out. Can't you make up your mind to mount him too, Captain? Your example would go a long way. I believe you are right in theory, said the other, and that's rather a hard bit about the soldiers, but, well, I'll think about it. And so they parted. Chapter 12. A Stormy Day. One day in the late autumn, my master had a long journey to go on business. I was put into the dog cart, and John went with his master. I always liked to go in the dog cart. It was so light, and the high wheels ran along so pleasantly. There had been a great deal of rain, and now the wind was very high and blew the dry leaves across the road in a shower. We went along merrily till we came to a toll bar and a low wooden bridge. The river banks were rather high, and the bridge, instead of rising, went across just level, so that in the middle, if the river was full, the water would be nearly up to the woodwork and planks. But as there was a good substantial rail on each side, people did not mind it. The man at the gate said the river was rising fast, and he feared it would be a bad night. Many of the meadows were under water, and in one low part of the road, the water was halfway up to my knees. The bottom was good, and the master drove gently, so it was no matter. When we got to the town, of course I had a good bait, but as the master's business engaged him a long time, we did not start for home till rather late in the afternoon. The wind was then much higher, and I heard the master say to John he had never been out in such a storm, and so I thought as we went along the skirts of the wood, where the great branches were swaying about like twigs, and the rushing sound was terrible. I wish we were well out of this wood, said my master. Yes, sir, said John. It would be rather awkward if one of these branches came down upon us. The words were scarcely out of his mouth when there was a groan and a crack and a splitting sound, and tearing, crashing down among the other trees came an oak, torn up by the roots, and it fell right across the road just before us. I will never say I was not frightened, for I was. I stopped still, and I believe I trembled. Of course, I did not turn round or run away. I was not brought up for that. John jumped out and was in a moment at my head. That was a very near touch, said my master. What's to be done now? Well, sir, we can't drive over the tree, nor yet get round it. There will be nothing for it. But to go back to the 4 crossways, and that will be a good 6 miles before we get round to the wooden bridge again. It will make us late, but the horse is fresh. So back we went and round the crossroad, but by the time we got to the bridge, it was very nearly dark. We could just see the water was over the middle of it, but that happened sometimes when the floods were out. Master did not stop. We were going along at a good pace, but the moment my feet touched the first part of the bridge, I felt sure there was something wrong. I dare not go forward, and I made a dead stop. Go on, Beauty, said my master, and he gave me a touch with the whip, but I did not stir. He gave me a sharp cut. I jumped, but I dare not go forward. There's something wrong, sir, said John, and he sprang out of the dog cart and came to my head and looked all about. He tried to lead me forward. Come on, Beauty, what's the matter? Of course, I could not tell him, but I knew very well that the bridge was not safe. Just then, the man at the toll gate at the other side ran out of the house, tossing a torch about like one mad. "Hoi, hoi, hoi, halloo! Stop!" he cried. "What's the matter?" shouted my master. "The bridge is broken in the middle, and part of it is carried away. If you come on, you'll be into the river." "Thank God," said my master. "You beauty," said John, and took the bridle and gently turned me round to the right-hand road by the riverside. The sun had set some time, and the wind seemed to be lulled off after the furious blast which tore up the tree. It grew darker and darker, stiller and stiller. I trotted quietly along, the wheels hardly making a sound on the soft road. For a good while, neither master nor John spoke, and then master began in a serious voice. I could not understand much of what they said, but I found they thought if I had gone on as master wanted me, most likely the bridge would have given way under us, and horse, chaise, master, and man would have fallen into the river. And as the current was flowing very strongly, and there was no light and no help at hand, it was more than likely we should have been drowned. Master said God had given men reason, by which they could find out things for themselves, but he had given animals knowledge, which did not depend on reason, and which was more prompt and perfect in its own way, and by which they had often saved the lives of men. John had many stories to tell of dogs and horses and wonderful things they had done. He thought people did not value their animals half enough, nor make friends of them as they ought to. I am sure he makes friends of them, if ever a man did. At last we came to the park gates and found the gardener looking out for us. He said the mistress had been in a dreadful way ever since dark, fearing some accident had happened, and that she had sent James off on Justice, the roan cob, towards the wooden bridge to make inquiry after us. We saw a light at the hall door and at the upper windows. As we came up, mistress ran out, saying, "Are you really safe, my dear? Oh, I have been so anxious, fancying all sorts of things." "Have you had no accident?" "No, my dear, but if your Black Beauty had not been wiser than we were, we should have been carried down the river at the wooden bridge." I heard no more, as they went into the house, and John took me to the stable. Oh, what a good supper he gave me that night! A good bran mash, and some crushed beans with my oats, and such a thick bed of straw, and I was glad of it, for I was tired. Chapter 13. The Devil's Trademark. One day, when John and I had been out on some business of our master's, and we were returning gently on a long straight road, at some distance we saw a boy trying to leap a pony over a gate. The pony would not take the leap, and the boy cut him with a whip. But he only turned off on one side. He whipped him again, but the pony turned off on the other side. Then the boy got off and gave him some hard thrashing and knocked him about the head. Then he got up again and tried to make him leap the gate, kicking him all the time shamefully, but still the pony refused. When we were nearly at the spot, the pony put down his head and threw up his heels and sent the boy nearly onto the broad quickset hedge. And with the rein dangling from his head, he set off home at a full gallop. John laughed quite out loud. "Served him right," he said. "Oh, oh, oh," cried the boy as he struggled about among the thorns. "I say, come and help me out." "Thank ye," said John. "I think you are quite in the right place, and maybe a little scratching will teach you not to leap a pony over a gate that is too high for him." And so with that, John rode off. "It may be," he said to himself, "that young fellow is a liar as well as a cruel one. We'll just go home by Farmer Bushby's Beauty, and then if anybody wants to know, you and I can tell him, you see." So we turned off to the right and soon came up to the stackyard and within sight of the house. The farmer was hurrying out into the road, and his wife was standing at the gate looking very frightened. "Have you seen my boy?" said Mr. Bushby as we came up. "He went out an hour ago on my black pony. The creature is just back without a rider." "I should think, sir," said John, "he had better be without a rider, unless he can be ridden properly." "What do you mean?" said the farmer. "Well, sir, I saw your son whipping and kicking and knocking that good little pony about shamefully, because he would not leap a gate that was too high for him. The pony behaved well, sir, and showed no vice, but at last he just threw up his heels and tipped the young gentleman into the thorn hedge. He wanted me to help him out, but I hope you will excuse me, sir. I did not feel inclined to do so. There's no bones broken, sir. He'll only get a few scratches. I love horses, and it riles me to see them used badly. It was a bad plan to aggravate that animal till he used his heels. The first time is not always the last. During this time the mother began to cry, "Oh, my poor Bill! I must go and meet him. He must be hurt." "You'd better go into the house, wife," said the farmer. "Bill wants a lesson about this, and I must see he gets it. This is not the first time, nor the second, he has ill-used that pony, and I shall stop it. I am much obliged to you, Manly. Good evening." And so we went on, John chuckling all the way home. And then he told James about it, who laughed and said, "Served him right. I knew that boy at school. He took great airs on himself, because he was a farmer's son. He used to swagger about and bully the little boys. Of course, we elder ones would not have any of that nonsense. And we let him know that in the school and in the playground, farmer's son and laborer's sons are all alike. I well remember one day, just before afternoon school, I found him at the large window catching flies and pulling off their wings. He did not see me, and I gave him a box on the ears that laid him sprawling on the floor. Well, angry as I was almost frightened. He roared and bellowed in such a style. The boys rushed in from the playground, and the master ran in from the road to see who was being murdered. Of course, I said fair and square at once what I had done, and why, and I showed the master the poor flies, some crushed, some crawling about helpless, and I showed him the wings on the windowsill. I never saw him so angry before, but as Bill was still howling and whining, like the coward he was, he did not give him any more punishment of that kind, but set him up on a stool for the rest of the afternoon and said he should not go out to play that week. Then he talked to all the boys very serious about cruelty, and said how hard-hearted and cowardly it was to hurt the weak and helpless. But what stuck in my mind was this. He said that cruelty was the devil's own trademark, and if we saw anyone who took pleasure in cruelty, we might know who he belonged to, for the devil was a murderer from the beginning and a tormentor to the end. On the other hand, where we saw people who loved their neighbors and were kind to man and beast, we might know that was God's mark, for God is love. "Your master never taught you a truer thing," said John. "There is no religion without love." And people may talk as much as they like about their religion, but if it does not teach them to be good and kind to man and beast, it is all a sham, James, and it won't stand when things come to be turned upside down and put for what they are. Chapter 14. James Howard. One morning, early in December, John had led me into my box after my daily exercise and was strapping my cloth on, and James was coming in from the corn chamber with some oats when the master came into the stable. He looked rather serious and held an open letter in his hand. John fastened the door of my box, touched his cap, and waited for orders. "Good morning, John," said the master. "I want to know if you have any complaint to make of James." "Complaint, sir?" "No, sir." "Is he industrious at work and respectful to you?" "Yes, sir, always." "You never find he slights his work when your back is turned?" "Never, sir." "That's well, but I must put another question. Have you any reason to suspect that when he goes out with the horses to exercise them, or to take a message, he stops about talking to his acquaintances, or goes into houses where he has no business, leaving the horses outside?" "No, sir, certainly not. And if anybody has been saying that about James, I don't believe it. And I don't mean to believe it unless I have it fairly proven before witnesses. It's not for me to say who has been trying to take away James's character. But I will say this, sir, that a steadier, pleasanter, honester, smarter young fellow I have never had in this stable." I can trust his word, and I can trust his work. He is gentle and clever with the horses, and I would rather have them in his charge than in that of half the young fellows I know in laced hats and liveries. When whoever wants a character of James Howard, said John, with a decided jerk of his head, let them take on John Manley. The master stood all this time, grave and attentive, but as John finished his speech, a broad smile stretched across his face, and he looked kindly at James, who all this time had stood still at the door. He said, James, my lad, set down the oats and come here. I am very glad to find that John's opinion of your character agrees so exactly with my own. John is a cautious man, he said, with a droll smile, and it is not always easy to get his opinion about people. So I thought if I beat the bush on the side, the birds would fly out, and I should learn what I wanted to know quickly. So now we will come to business. I have a letter from my brother-in-law, Sir Clifford Williams of Clifford Hall. He wants me to find him a trustworthy young groom, about 20 or 21, who knows his business. His old coachman, who has lived with him 30 years, is getting feeble, and he wants a man to work with him and get into his ways, who would be able, when the old man was pensioned off, to step into his place. He would have 18 shillings a week at first, a stable suite, a driving suite, a bedroom over the coach house, and a boy under him. Sir Clifford is a good master, and if you could get the place, it would be a good start for you. I don't want to part with you, and if you left us, I know John would lose his right hand. That I should, sir, said John, but I would not stand in the light for this in his light for the world. How old are you, James? Said Master. 19 next May, sir. That's young. What do you think, John? Well, sir, it is young, but he is as steady as a man, and is strong and well-grown, and though he has not had much experience in driving, he has a light, firm hand and a quick eye. And he is very careful, and I am quite sure no horse of his will be ruined for want of having his feet and shoes looked after. Your word will go the farthest, John, said the master, for Sir Clifford adds in the postscript, if I could find a man trained by your John, I should like him better than any other. So, James, lad, think it over. Talk to your mother at dinner time, and then let me know what you wish. In a few days after this conversation, it was fully settled that James should go to Clifford Hall in a month or 6 weeks, as it suited his master, and in the meantime he was to get all the practice in driving that could be given to him. I never knew the carriage to go out so often before. When the mistress did not come out, the master drove himself in a 2-wheeled chaise, but now, whether it was the master or the young ladies, or only an errand, Ginger and I were put into the carriage, and James drove us. At the first, John rode with him on the box, telling him this and that, and after, James drove alone. Then it was wonderful what a number of places the master would go to in the city on Saturday, and what queer streets we were driven through. He was sure to go to the railway station just as the train was coming in, and cabs and carriages, carts and omnibuses were all trying to get over the bridge together. That bridge wanted good horses and good drivers when the railway bell was ringing, for it was narrow, and there was a very sharp turn up the station, where it would not have been at all difficult for people to run into each other if they did not look sharp and keep their wits about them. That is all for today. I look forward to learning more about where beauty will go when we meet again tomorrow.